Following information is the first chapter, plus a portion of the second, of the book written in 1868 entitled The Negroes of Negroland. It's a book which is a collection of quotes from several books written by a handful of brave European explorers in or around the approximate years of the 1790s to 1860s. These white European explorers wrote daily journals as they ventured inward towards the interior of the continent from the eastern coast of Africa, mapping and making written observations while in search of the mysterious source of the Nile, which we now know, due to their discoveries, to be Lake Victoria itself. Some of the explorers' primary purpose being in Africa was to act as Christian missionaries, bringing the good news of the Lord Jesus Christ to the primitive, unaware black Africans who weren't a part of the Bible, as souls of the Europeans wanted to ensure would be saved from the eternal damnation of hell and entered into God's heavenly paradise known as heaven. The following is the European explorers' quotes taken directly from their journals and books written on Africa throughout the 1800s. As you'll soon realize, the following information destroys the myth of the gentle or noble savage. These were entered into according to the Act of Congress in the year 1868 by G.W. Carleton, the office clerk of the District Court of the Southern District of New York. So let's begin. The Negroes in Negroland, Chapter 1, Cannibalism in Negroland. It is plain from all history that two abominable practices, the one of eating of men and the other of sacrificing them to the devil, prevailed all over Africa. The India trade, as we have seen in very early ages, first established buying and selling of slaves. Since that time, the eating of men or sacrificing them has so greatly decreased on the eastern side of the peninsula that now we scarcely hear of an instance of either of these that can be properly vouched. On the western part, towards the Atlantic Ocean, though, where the sale of slaves began considerable time later after the discovery of the Americas and the West Indies, both of these horrid practices are still in general, and this is from Bruce's Africa, Volume 1, page 393. What he's not taking into account here or speaking of is the Islamic slave trade, which began well over 900 years before the Americas were even found, but they used to castrate the slaves and so on, and there really wasn't anything to come out of that, and I can't believe he's not aware of it in any way, shape, or form. But let's continue. The common food of the natives of Anseco, or Africa, is men's flesh, insomuch that their markets are provided with that, as ours in Europe are with beef or mutton. All prisoners of war, unless they can sell them alive with greater advantage. Otherwise, as we said, they fatten them for slaughter, and at last sell them to the butchers. To the savage barbarity they are naturalized. To some slaves, whether it is weary of their lives or to show their love for their masters, they will proffer themselves freely and be killed and eaten, but which is most inhuman and beyond the ferocity of beasts. The father scruples not to eat the son not their father, but they take them by force, devouring their flesh, the blood yet reeking between their teeth. Whosoever dies, be the disease never so contagious, yet they eat the flesh immediately as a festival dish. Bello, the governor of Sakatu, said that whenever a person complained of sickness amongst the Yams, even though only a slight headache, they are killed instantly for fear that they should be lost by death, as they will not eat a person who has died by sickness, and that the person falling sick is requested by some other family and repaid when they had a sick relative of their own. That universally when they went to war, the dead and wounded were always eaten, and that the hearts were claimed by the headmen, and that they, on asking them why they eat human flesh, they said that it was better than any other, and that the heart and breast of the woman were the best parts of the body. And this is Denham and Clapperton's Africa, Volume 4, page 262. Many of Abraham's party had been frequent witnesses to the act of cannibalism during their residence among the Macoritas. They described these cannibals as remarkably good people, but possessing a peculiar taste for dogs and human flesh. Now, they accompanied the trading party on the Razas and invariably ate the bodies of the slain. The traders, though, complained that they were bad associates, as they insisted upon killing and eating the children. which the party wished to secure as slaves. Their custom was to catch a child by its ankles and dash its head against the ground. Thus killed, they opened the abdomen, extracted out the stomach and intestines, and tying the two ankles to the neck, they carried the body by slinging it over the shoulder, and thus returned to the camp, where they divided it by quartering and boiling it in a large pot. One of the slave girls attempted to escape, and her proprietor immediately shot her with his musket. She fell wounded, and the ball had struck her in the side. The girl was remarkably fattened, and from the wound a large lump of yellow fat exuded. No sooner had she fallen than the Macacoritas rushed upon her in a crowd, and seizing the fat, they tore it from the wound in handfuls. The girl being still alive, while the crowd were quarreling for the disgusting prize. The others killed her with a lance, and at once divided her by cutting off her head and splitting the body with their lances, used as knives, cutting it longitudinally from between the legs along the spine to the neck. That's Baker's Great Basin of the Nile, 201. The butcher shops of the Anziquis are filled with human flesh instead of that of oxen or of sheep, for they eat the enemies who they take in battle. They fatten, slay, and devour their slaves also, unless they think they should get a good price for them. There are indeed many cannibals, but none such as these, since the others are of the enemies, but these eat their own blood relations. This is African Explorations by Eduardo Lopez, quoted by Thomas Huxley in Man's Place in Nature, page 55. On the occasion of the appointment of a chief to the supreme command, a bullock is sacrificed by de Samba Galambole, as also a white sheep and a white fawn or colored pigeon, together with various other victims. But the principal sacrifices are that of a slave from each of the nations under the dominion of the paramount chief, the heads of whom are are exhibited to the populace, accompanied by drums and other instruments, and are added to those of other animals, and all cooked together and distributed as a savory dish to the chief and the other nobles. This is Valdez's Africa, Volume 2, page 331. The next morning we moved off for the Fan or Negro village, and now I had the opportunity to satisfy myself as a matter I had cherished some doubt on before, namely the cannibal practices of these people. I was satisfied but too soon. As we entered the town, and I perceived some bloody remains which looked to me to be a human, but I passed on, still incredulous. Presently we passed a woman who solved all doubt, for she wore with her a piece of a thigh of a human, just as we should go to a market and carry hence a roast or a steak. And this was Paul de Chalet's Equatorial Africa, page 103. Until today, I never could believe two stories, both well authenticated, but seeming quite impossible to any one unacquainted with this people, which are told of them on the Lagoon. A party of fans who came down to the seashore once to see the sea actually stole a freshly buried body from the cemetery and took part of another body, conveyed it to the woods, and cut it apart and smoked it as they would, which they carried away from them. Circumstances of the missionaries heard about it, but I never credited the stories until now. Facts are well authenticated by witnesses in the fact that the Negroes seem to be regular ghouls, eating the dead, only they practice their horrid custom unblushingly in the open day and have no shame about it. These stories seem so incredible in the fact that these people alone eat the corpses of their neighbors, resting as it does upon my statement alone so much evident disbelief among friends in the country of whom that I tell of this custom, that I am very glad to be able to avail myself on the concurrent testimony of a friend, the Reverend Mr. Walker of the Gaboon Mission, who authorities tell to me vouches for the entire truth of the two stories above related. And this is again Paul de Chalet's Equatorial Africa, page 120. While I was talking to the king today, some Negroes brought in a dead body which they had bought in a neighboring town, and which was now to be divided. I could see the men had died of some disease. I confess I could not bear to stay for the cutting up of the body, but retreated when all was ready. It made me sick all over, and I remained until the infernal scene was about to begin, and then retreated. Afterwards I could hear them from my house growing noisily over the division and those who had died of sickness for which I had never heard of any people, so that I determined to inquire if it was indeed a general custom or merely an acceptable freak. They spoke without embarrassment about the whole matter, and I was informed that they constantly eat the dead of the Oshebe tribe, who in turn abide theirs. This is again Paul de Shaw's Equatorial Africa, page 120. After visiting the house assigned me, I was taken through the town, where I saw more dreadful signs of cannibalism in piles of human bones mixed up with offal, stone up against several houses. The Chalets, Equatorial Africa, page 105. On going out the next morning, I saw a pile of ribs, leg and arm bones, and skulls piled up at the back of my house, which looked horrid to me. In fact, symptoms of cannibalism stare at me in the face wherever I go. The Shaw's Equatorial Africa, page 106. Chapter 2, just the beginning. Human butchery and human sacrifices in Negroland. The main object contemplated in the national anniversary of Dahomey is in that the king may water the graves of his ancestors with the blood of human victims. These are numerous, consisting of prisoners taken in war, of condemned criminals, and of many seized by lawless violence. The captives are brought in succession with their arms pinioned, and a fetcher, laying his hand upon the devoted head, utters a few magical words, and then someone behind with a large scimitar severs the head from the body, when shouts start erupting from the crowd of the surrounding multitude. At any time when the king has messages for his deceased relations, he delivers it to one of them through the use of this head, which he may carry to the other world, and if any other referring occurs to him that he perform this ceremony, he delivers it to another messenger, whom he dispatches in the same manner. Another great object of this periodical festival is the market for wives. All the unmarried females throughout the kingdom are esteemed property of the sovereign, and are brought to the annual customs to be placed at his disposal. He selects for himself such as appear most beautiful and engaging, and retails the others at enormous prices to his chiefs and nobles. No choice on this occasion is allowed to the purchaser. In return for his 20,000 cowries, a wife is handed out, and even though she shall be old and ugly, he must be rest contented. Nay, some, it is said, have in mockery been presented with their own mothers. The king usually keeps his wives up, and who serve him in various capacities, being partially trained to act as a bodyguard, regularly regimented and equipped with drums, flags, bows, and arrows, while a few canny muskets. They also reside in the palace, which consists merely of an immense assemblage of cane and mud tents, enclosed by a high wall. The skulls and jawbones of enemies slain in battle form the favorite ornament of the palaces and temples. The king's apartment is paved, and the walls and roofs struck over with these horrid trophies. And if a further supply appears purposed, he announces to his general that his house wants thatch, when a war is immediately undertaken. Murray's African Discoveries, page 199. At Kumase, the customs of human sacrifices are practiced on a scale that are still even more tremendous than at Dahomey. The king had lately sacrificed on the grave of his mother 3,000 victims, 2,000 of whom were Fante prisoners, and at the death of the late sovereign, the sacrifice was continued weekly for 3 months, consisting each time of 2,000 slaves. The absurd belief here entertained that the rank of these led him to a world decided by the train which he carries along with him, makes it final in promoting that this means of the exaltation of a departed parent. On this, the Cambyses and princes, in order to court royal favor, often rush out, see the first person they meet, and drag him in for sacrifice while the customs last. Therefore, it is with trembling steps that anyone crosses his threshold, and with compelled to do so, he rushes along with the utmost speed, dreading every instant the murderous grasp could be led him to death. This is Murray's African Discoveries, page 204. The practice of offering human sacrifices to appease evil spirits is common, but in no place more frequent than on a larger scale in the kingdoms of Ashanti and Dahomey. And in the Bonny River, large numbers of victims, chief prisoners of war, are satiatedly satisfied to the manes of the royal ancestors in both of the first mentioned places of shocking and almost unparalleled cruelty. At the time of death, a king, a large number of his principal wives, and favorite slaves are all put to death, not so much, however, as sacrifice to appease his wrath, as to be his companions and attendants in another world, a practice which, though cruel and revolting in itself, nevertheless keeps up a lively impression of a future state of existence. Wilson's Africa, page 219. We find throughout all the country north of the 20th or southern parallel to be Negroes. The custom of slaughtering victims to accompany the departed soul, a chief, a human sacrifices are occasionally offered in certain parts of the body, are used as charms. This is by Dr. Livingston. And so we can see some of these tales that are recanted by some of these first explorers delving up into this area and what they had encountered. And indeed, they said to themselves that it was far worse to the west. But a strange thing also happens whenever you look up this same exact book. For if I just back it up here and I looked up Negroland, what you're going to mainly see is black people having written up and made videos where they talk about Negroland and how they're part of Egypt, which West Africans didn't know it existed, nor the Bible, and they sure weren't a part of it in any way, shape, or form. Black people, the Bible's a Caucasian, it's about 3 Caucasians spread out and made the certain areas there, the Egyptians and so on. It has nothing to do with black people, but Hebrew Israelite Negroes from Negroland, the kingdom of Judah. And what they found is that some of these maps, see if I can find one here, some of these maps will show some sites on them. Here's one of the old ones, yeah, and it shows some sites here where actually, man, I don't know if I can get in here, and if you look at it, there's these places that are mentioned as Ethiopians and so on, and then just Negroland in this one spot. And that's because there was Negroes there, and then above that, all across North Africa, there were not. And they're even saying there weren't in these other places, or yet they had already been taken at the time of the map, and that they seem to have been, I guess, from the Islamic slave trade and so on. But they have all these racist videos coming out now trying to say that they were the black people, the lineage of Ham. Well, you look up Hamites, and it's North African and Egyptian Caucasians. Exactly word for word. You look at Caucasians, and it says that they come all the way up through and into the Horn of Africa at that time. Ethiopians were talked about as being here, not so much the people that are there. And Negroland is only really this area that's up into here. And so again, here's a pastor, Richard Kelly, is at it again after awakening over 4,000 people at the Black Lives Matter march in Richmond, Virginia. And so they're going around spreading these self-made up, jealous, racist lies. And it's pretty disgusting. Negroland, tribe of Judah, and there's a place called Oida, and it's really supposed to be about the little birds there. That's what they're called. It's kind of like a little pigeon type of thing, but not a pigeon, more like a sparrowish type of thing. And then they say, oh, that's us. That actually means Judah. There was no J. And you're like, yeah, there was no J, but that has nothing to do with you. And so they've started this racist type of thing, and it's getting worse and worse, and nobody's putting him in check and letting him know. And they're telling you they're the northern kingdom of Israel, and they're this and they're that, and they're not a part of the Bible. And they weren't the Egyptians, and they were West African primitives, and it's kind of disgusting. Anyhow, guys, like, share, and subscribe. And this is just a little part 1 of it and stuff, and it goes on quite some bit. I'll probably edit my way through part of some of the other ones and do upcoming vids on it too. But yeah, like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy, and we'll carry on. Peace.